Yes, yes, go ahead.
Okay. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Kul huwallahu ahad. Allahus samad. Lam yalid. Walam yulad. Walam yakul lahu kufuwan ahad. Sadaqallahul azim. On behalf of Corporate Pakistan Group, I'm grateful to all the speakers and participants for their presence here. This is our second episode of China-India conflict dialogue series. Last week we hosted on Sunday during the same dialogue. As a formality, I always started the program with the introduction of Corporate Pakistan Group during all virtual sessions. And reason is that right now on Zoom, there are only few participants, very few invitees. But this is live on Facebook, on Nutshell Forum, Nutshell Conferences Facebook Live. So for the new participants, we always introduce Corporate Pakistan Group. So first of all, we are celebrating the 5th year of Corporate Pakistan Group. Yesterday was our 5th anniversary. Last year, we hosted anniversary dinner in Islamabad Serena Hotel, attended by around 400 leaders from all over Pakistan. Corporate Pakistan Group, we started in 2015. And today, there are 256 members of Corporate Pakistan Group. There are corporate leaders, business leaders. There are parliamentarians, senators, and ministers. There are federal secretaries from various ministries. There are defense personnel, serving and retired officers of our armed forces, Army, Navy, and Air Force, police officials, energy experts, IT experts, media practitioners, foreign policy experts, a few diplomats based in different countries, and also the movers and shakers of civil society. Since last 5 years, we are hosting our physical meetings, get-togethers, dialogues in Karachi, Lahore, Islamabad, and Dubai. We started Dubai operations 2 years back. And on monthly basis, we are hosting our physical meetings. And this is the scenario before March 2020. So our last activity, physical activity, we hosted in Dubai with Governor State Bank, Dr. Azabakir. This was a dinner discussion. And CPG is completely apolitical group. There are 7 mainstream political parties, leadership is here, and we are apolitical. Our discussions within the group are very healthy and very productive. And this is Pakistan's national intelligence here. So after the starting of lockdown, we started virtual sessions, and so far we hosted, this is our 10th virtual session in last 3 months. So we hosted on Pakistan economy, we hosted few on leadership, on health issues, and we also hosted the federal budget dialogue with Dr. Abdul Hafiz Sheikh, Dr. Miftah Ismail, Dr. Shamshad Akhtar, Ehsan Malik, and Farooq Khan of Pakistan Stock Exchange, while Zulfikar Akhtar of PwC moderated. Last week, we hosted the dialogue on China-India conflict and its implication on Pakistan, Kashmir movement, and BRI. This was attended by President of Azad Jammu Kashmir, Sardar Masood Khan. He was the inaugural keynote. We hosted the first dialogue with Senator Mushahid Hussain Sayyid, General Athar Abbas, the former DG ISPR, and Dr. Huma Bakai, while Dr. Rabia Akhtar was the moderator. We hosted the second dialogue on the same subject with Dr. Daniel Markey from Johns Hopkins University, Dr. Abdul Najam from Boston University, and Sajjad Karim from European Parliament. Sharaf Badi was the moderator of second dialogue. And we hosted Prime Minister's Special Assistant on National Security, Dr. Mohit Yusuf, for the closing keynote. We received very good response, very good feedback. And this was a real debate on the subject. Different perspectives our learned speakers and panelists shared. And after the very good feedback, we decided to continue this series. And within 1 week, we are here today again on Sunday, same time, with outstanding speakers with us. So our today's inaugural keynote is Senator Sherry Rehman, our very dear friend. She is the chairperson and the founding president of Jinnah Institute. She is also the chairman, CPAC Relations Committee for Senate of Pakistan. She served as Pakistan's ambassador in the United States and also the Federal Ministry for Information and Broadcasting. This will be followed by a very productive dialogue. 4 outstanding speakers for this dialogue. The first speaker for the dialogue is Lieutenant General retired Naeem Khalid Lodhi. He was also part of the Pakistan group. He served as a caretaker federal minister in 2018 for the defense, and he also served as Pakistan's defense secretary. He is defense analyst, while our second speaker is my teacher, my mentor, Ambassador Riaz, a very learned man, 8 years old, but is still very young, very active. And I had interactions with him during my 8 days residential course in the National Defense University. I must say he's a very good listener also. And his views, his command on the subject is commendable. So he served as Pakistan's foreign secretary. He also served as Pakistan's ambassador in the United States, China, India, and Bangladesh. He's one of the most relevant person for this subject. Our third speaker is my favorite, Nasim Zehra. She is national security expert and a prominent journalist, columnist, and TV host. And she is author of a famous book, From Kargil to the COP. Our fourth speaker is our friend from Washington. I'm especially grateful to him for his presence because of early morning in Washington right now. Michael from Woodrow Wilson Institute Center. He is Deputy Director and Senior Associate for South Asia Center for Wilson Center. Michael, I'm grateful to you. And Michael's main specialties are Pakistan, India, and Afghanistan, and also the US relations with each of them. We are again hosting Mosharraf Zaidi, who is our founding member of Corporate Pakistan Group, columnist, analyst, and senior fellow of the Bed Lab, and he is our today's moderator. So without any further delay, I'm handing over to you, Mosharraf, for the further proceedings. I'm also very grateful, I missed to mention our managing committee of Corporate Pakistan Group, Zanfar Ali, who is the country manager of IBM Pakistan and Afghanistan. He is hosting today's meeting. I'm grateful to my team of Nutshell Conferences, who is behind this screen, managing the operations and managing the Facebook Live. So our audience with Facebook Live, and I want to share that last week discussion was attended by over 20,000 participants from different parts of the world. So hopefully this will be the same number in today's session. So over to you, Mosharraf, now.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. First of all, let me thank you, Asfar, for this opportunity. I think it merits me mentioning that it is only CPG that would have been able to drag me to this specific event. As Asfar knows and other friends know, I'm hosting another conversation immediately after this one. And I tried very hard to resist. But when I looked at the names of the speakers, each one of the names, I felt compelled, not only because of my love and commitment for Asfar and for CPG, but really because of my deep regard and admiration for the speakers. None more so than Sherry Rehman, my first boss, and she continues to be my boss almost a quarter century later. So boss, thank you for agreeing to do this. We're really excited to have you as the keynote speaker. We anticipate you'll speak for 5 to 10 minutes, and then I'll ask you a few questions, and then I'll bring in some questions from the audience as well, and then we'll move to the wider panel. Bismillah, Sherry Rehman. Jerry, you have to unmute before, you have to unmute.
Beg your pardon. Gigi, thank you very much, CPG and its organizers and SNSAF for doing this. Mosharraf, that was a lovely introduction. Without much ado, I'm just going to dive into the few remarks been asked to make. Really, first of all, I think that there was a very robust discussion last time on the same subject. So I really will focus on the specific impacts on Pakistan and how it's changing, and then we can unpack it a little bit. First of all, I think this whole China-India standoff is far more serious than it was initially assumed to be. By the middle of May, I remember looking at it and writing about it and was told, well, that's not a very serious, it will de-escalate. Well, even if it de-escalates, which to some extent it will, because China and India will be looking at a diplomatic management of containment of the fallout, China has actually gone quite far compared to Doklam and other times to suggest that it is seeing India in an egregiously revisionist light. Now, what does that mean? At the heart of this conflict, I think I'm not going to go into tactically who went in first or what Daulat Beg Oldie Road was, or what happened in the Pangong area. We've reconstructed that to no end. What is at the core of this is, I think, to my mind, is obviously the Modi government's regime's expansionist behavior. And in this expansionism, it has not taken into account the fact that when it changed the status of, unilaterally changed the status of Jammu and Kashmir, this would make the whole dispute into not just a UN mandated dispute or internationally mandated dispute, and as the Simla agreement says, between India and Pakistan, but also it has made China, obviously the Kashmiris are part of it, China into a player and stakeholder in the whole dispute. China is in here now since Ladakh was made into a union territory. Obviously, Aksai Chin is considered, it's claimed by China. It always has been. And for India to ride roughshod over that has obviously provoked a certain amount of, I would think, worry in China, and Beijing then obviously mobilized troops to that border when it saw activity on the particular road that we keep talking about, the Shire of Daulat Beg Oldie Road, particularly the infrastructure, the airbase, all of that. And we have a couple of weeks of literal fog of war, because no military equipment is allowed there, no arms are allowed there, given the sensitivity of the terrain and the fact that at least 23 points on that border, not the Galwan Valley only, but even outside the Galwan Valley, there are at least 23 points which are actually called areas of perceived, gain. I mean, they are just, this is a perception-based border. Very little of it is demarcated really or on maps. And this is a problem. So yes, it can potentially become a serious flashpoint. And I think it has grown from a standoff to a flashpoint now. Particularly worrisome because it is at the confluence and intersect of borders, certainly India and China, are two nuclear powers. And they are both seeking to project power. They're both in a race for, in their view, regional hegemony. And Pakistan is, of course, at another restive border at the LOC. There's the LAC, the LOC, and all these three are nuclear countries which are not necessarily with India in the middle. India is not at peace with any of them. So that's, I think, very important to understand why this can be seen as a great game situation and why great powers would move into this area because, or look into moving and perhaps even interceding. And President Trump's offer, he's made 3 offers since Bill Clinton, to intercede in Kashmir, and that was met with a big chill from both sides, India and China. You all saw that. So where do we go from here? And let me just quickly talk about how Pakistan could be impacted. And I would not, of course, be sanguine at all about how Pakistan could be impacted. While India and China would be seeking to de-escalate at some point, I think a certain Rubicon has been crossed strategically. And there's no going back. Now, Modi is under pressure in New Delhi and from his opposition in the Lok Sabha to very clearly state why this has happened. Was India's security establishment asleep at the wheel? All of the opposition demands why there's been a reputational loss. There's been a huge reputational loss to India and a concomitant loss to Modi's strongman posture within the country, particularly because, of course, as you know, the confusion about what happened on June 15th, he has not been able to explain. He keeps saying, well, you know, our soldiers didn't die. We didn't lose any soldiers to the Chinese, or they were they were in our side, or we were in their side. The Indian soldiers, what were they then doing in the Chinese side? He said they ingress, and then he obviously said that Galwan Valley is what it is. So there's clearly been a conceding of space, both strategic and perceptional and reputational. I can't even speak to the territorial implications of this, because this is a region where both sides have been claiming territory and sovereignty for a long time, since 1962. So no one can really say who moved in where. This is a perceived area of perceived demarcations or non-demarcations. So this is one of the problems. It will then remain potentially unstable. Both sides are moving much larger contingents of military into the area. And right now, while India politically has ceded ground and there's a little bit of underplay, there was in the media, in sharp contrast to how Pakistan is spoken about in the Indian media. And that's actually what alerted many of us to the implications for Pakistan. So what are we looking at? We're looking at Modi going into a November election, state election in Bihar. We're looking at him losing reputationally, which to him, domestic internal posturing is extremely important. He is seeing this, what India calls a bilateral issue, turning it into a trilateral or possibly quadrilateral issue. And there is a fair amount of consternation. Now, what are the threats to Pakistan? I believe they're literally 10, and we should not be sanguine. And I just want to do a quick readout of what the Indians have been talking about. Look at what they've been saying. Since the controversial measures taken in Kashmir last year, since August, India's politicians have systematically upped the bilateral ante with Pakistan in Azad Kashmir and Gilgit-Baltistan, and they continue to do so. Instead of closing, for instance, number one, the embassy, you think that the embassy in Beijing would be halved. No, because that is where India cannot retort or take proportionate actions. It is deflecting in Pakistan, which we can all see. The halving of the diplomatic missions was the first one, and it happened suddenly from New Delhi with no obvious provocation from Pakistan. So that's one. And listen to what they've been saying. Earlier this year, India's new army chief said that the Indian army was ready to seize control, quote unquote, ready to seize control of Pakistani territory if directed by the Indian government. So that's military posturing, fine. Then they go on to say that the same month, Narendra Modi says India only needs 7 to 10 days to defeat Pakistan, okay, in a war. And you can say that that was also posturing. Then, of course, and there's a lot of posturing that goes on between the two countries, as we all know. But just a fortnight ago, India's defense minister reiterated that taking Pakistani Kashmir was now a quote unquote stated goal of India's parliament. This is a very big statement to make. It is existential at every level. And normally we would put down such statements, and they've made them in the past. But this is a beast that is provoked, it is bleeding, and it wants to hit back somewhere else. It wants to hit back to on a border that feels it is less vulnerable. So here we have, what do we see? We first see India having its diplomatic commission in Pakistan, and then asking Pakistan, obviously before that, to vacate its own position there. So 50-50. No having in Beijing, which is where they've had the conflict. So that is my one point. Secondly, if you noticed, Indian positions in their part of held Kashmir are already changing. Any artillery mapping will tell you that they're digging in stakes for long range firing into Pakistan. And thirdly, the LOC has been active, the line of control has been active constantly, which has been a case since 2017. And from January 1st, we've seen belligerents, we've seen 1,404 cases of ceasefire violations, which our military tell us is unprovoked. We see crossings into the working boundary, which on the plains of the Punjab, where there can be no question of cross-border movement because it's all visible. There's no mountainous terrain. And innocent civilians have given their lives, over 59 just last year. That includes women and children. But humanitarian concerns are not of interest to the Modi regime. They feel that they're not answerable either internationally or multilaterally. And you also see, fourth, you see the Indian Met Department, the Meteorological Department, now forecasting weather for both Muzaffarabad and Skardu. This has never happened before. It has happened for the last week or so, and they are now moving to sort of make the predictions within it's seen as part of the Indian Union. That is the new narrative content. Now, if you ask yourself, fifthly, what are the impacts further militarily this can have? I mean, the generals are better placed to answer that, but we all know 2/3 of India's strike corps and battalions are faced off still against Pakistan, not against China, and this is very important. They're still faced off, and there's no change in that. And they feel that they can certainly move forward tactically in every which way. Fifthly, they can also certainly aggressively start imposing a sea denial in the Indian Ocean. It's very much their littoral that they use. And with a fair amount of aggression, I think will also be upgraded into the Western Pacific and the South China Sea, which is very tense in any case with China over there. And they will, I think, be looking at the Malacca Strait to try and disable China's movement as well, and build up the Quad front, the Japan, Vietnam, Australia, Indonesia ties. Now, obviously, sixthly, the important thing is that this is not, somebody scoffed this morning on Twitter or somewhere, but oh, this is a joke, the Indian military, Indian Navy to try to stand off or run interference against China. That's ridiculous. Well, they will certainly be looking at that because you already have Mike Pompeo saying, worryingly, that we up at the Brussels online forum that we are pulling out from Germany. We're pulling out troops from Germany, principally because China is, he didn't say that, but China is primarily a land power. And we're pulling out troops from Germany so that we can posture appropriately to meet new challenges in other theaters. And he also said that China is an aggressor in the South China Sea and in the Western Pacific. There is also great resentment about the BRI and the CPEC in all of this geopolitical context. And there is worry that with Gwadar opening up even better, this makes China a two-ocean power, which has a strong reputational, intellectual, and obviously geopolitical and trade impact for China and for the whole of the Eurasian region. So these 5, 6 things are already in play. Seventh, I think, given Modi's record, Pakistan needs not to be sanguine. We need to worry about what damming is happening of our water. He's been known to weaponize water before and could literally resort to that again, because frankly, Pakistan-India is a conflict that never fails to ignite passions on his media airwaves. It becomes Fox on steroids the minute Pakistan comes up. That is not the case with China. The whole conversation for the last 2 months from India has been, by and large, obviously there are exceptions, has been very studied, very measured, and looking at where India can diplomatically manage this. There's a restraint in the tone, and there's an urging of restraint even elsewhere by government. So can they go into a two-front war is the issue here. And lastly, I want to say that, obviously, India still has a very strong ally, also neuralgic about the China-Pakistan sort of nexus, if you like, or partnership, whereas it doesn't have to be zero-sum, but there is a neuralgia, it is growing, and they see China as flexing muscle, whereas Indian expansionism is what triggers this. The same is happening in Nepal. The same is, Bhutan really can't say much. They're not even allowed to open an embassy by Delhi in China. So they're completely in there. Bangladesh is being booed by China. There are things happening in India's neighborhood that it has not taken account of. And lastly, obviously trade action is always something that can be taken, but India-Pakistan trade has never come anywhere close to, optimistic estimates by the World Bank of 200 billion, etc. It's just sitting at roughly $37 billion, and it's not very much. Eighth point, I think that they can look at airspace, which is already after the COVID threat. Right now, it's already closed, but that's always been a weapon used between the two countries. And there is, of course, the obvious thing in the room, the big elephant in the room, the 10th point. What is it? It is the constant search for changing not just the public conversation, but moving past the memory of Balakot and Pulwama, which has given India a lot to think about in terms of Pakistan's conventional capabilities. And therefore, 10thly, I'm just going to say, with that memory in mind, they have an incentive, if you like, to beef up their own political incentive to stand up to Pakistan, which is not doing anything. Which is neither threatening them or competing. It is for Pakistan, it is not about competition or religion or even gaining territory. It's a question of survival, frankly, in terms of where our GDPs stand. And they've made that very clear. So surgical strikes, false flag operations, something that governments have been talking about repeatedly, are a very real tactical and strategic possibility. And Pakistan will have to be very clear that, lastly, at international forums, that other than this kind of potential attack or incursion, which we saw in Balakot after 1971, that was the first time Pakistan saw an Indian incursion into its own airspace. The last point will be, of course, international forums. Pakistan has FATF reviews coming up in October again. It's been put off because of COVID, and India has serious lobbying power there, of course, with the United States at its side in lockstep. And of course, we have the United Nations, where it has gained a seat at the Security Council, which Pakistan did not lobby against as per tradition of how these regional blocs go. So having said that, I think I've run well over the time. I was told initially 15, so I think I'm within 15 minutes here. On the potential threats and implications for China, for rather Pakistan, I also want to add that India has not forgotten, it will not forget, given its rising nationalism or rather ultra-nationalism, this particular regime will not forget that it has taken a bloody nose, if you like. I don't want to use such language, but there it is. And even with China, it will go into a medium term search for resetting the balance. That it will do first immediately in the Indian Ocean and, of course, the Western Pacific. It can threaten Chinese shipping. It can start aggressively, as I said, imposing sea denial there. It can upgrade ties with the Quad and other allies. And it will obviously look to change India's neutral status in the South China Sea. All this will have its impact on Pakistan. It may even seek it may even seek a security umbrella with the United States and the Quad, because this is a threat unlike anything India has seen for a long time, and it is now feeling the pinch. It wants to inflict pain on one border or the other. It has to lash out. Modi has to deflect the public conversation, and he's doing it. And this will escalate for Pakistan, I feel, both economically, militarily, and at strategically and at multilateral and international forums. India will play, and in the, of course, ocean, in the Indian Ocean, India will play all the cards it has while having to hold back against the military that is 5 times larger than it, which is China, or the GDP that is 4 times larger than it. We can talk about boycotts or potential issues later. Thank you. I hope that worked.
No, that's fantastic, Sherry. Thank you so much for that really comprehensive and quick summary of what's been happening. There's a number of questions that have come up. I wanted to start by asking one myself, which is really what Pakistan's official positioning and posture right now should be. You would have seen the news of the indication that Pakistan is open to reopening Kartarpur Sahib in time for a major event that is supposedly on the 29th of June, which is not far away. Not necessarily your comment on that potential opening, but more widely, how should Pakistan engage with India, particularly in this moment?
So thank you, Mosharraf. I think many of us feel that this whole standoff and this whole conflict has great costs for Pakistan, which 10 of which I outlined here. So it has great costs for Pakistan. The potential isolation, etc., that India will try to impose are very real. And Pakistan already, despite pursuing a very tough peace agreement with the Taliban and in full support of American goals and outcomes, will still, I feel, face vilification on both ends. On the return of the terrorism conversation, where you will see a return of the terrorism conversation at a global level, and therefore at multilateral, that Pakistan is still pursuing or using proxies or terrorism to further its goals. It's what it can't with its own formal military, so it's furthering those goals. So that conversation will obviously, I think, make a comeback, and Pakistan has to make a very clear, and we are seeing it coming back. Pakistan has to make it very clear that it stands for peace in the region, for normalization of ties between all the countries, the 3 nuclear countries, with a fair arsenal and an ability to inflict both military and economic pain. Instead of COVID, which we should all be actually battling together, given our water basins being joined, our air quality being shared, and many other things, we will see, I think, a growing distancing with neighbors next door. And Pakistan will have to say that while we stand for peace and stability, and we see the cost of posturing, obviously we are in a place where we have a nuclear deterrent, and sometimes I shudder to think what could happen without that, because with the growing multipolarity you see in the world, and with America's diminishing role in international organizations and multilateral placement, if you like. There's no Pax Americana anymore. And while that is happening, multipolarity is always more unstable than bipolar, like two poles like Russia and the Soviet Union, or even one hegemon globe. So we're going towards that dangerous place, and Pakistan is going to have to protect itself by projecting its own narrative far more aggressively and safeguarding its interests, its potential outcomes, much better than it has. Pakistan maintained a studied silence through this whole episode without looking at what potential impacts this could have. I'm not suggesting analysis become a tool of public diplomacy, but certainly Pakistan should have been staking its own position. It should have been saying that, look, India has has become the revisionist power. It is not the status quo power. India always called Pakistan the revisionist power. It is India which is now flexing muscle everywhere, and it is causing tectonic plates in a very, very tough region to change. And I didn't hear much of this. There was talk about false flags being expected. Okay, that's really a military projection, and it must be made because you're already stating what you see on the ground. Uh, but there has to be a broader embrace and understanding projected to people, to parliament, on public. It's not enough for a foreign office spokeswoman to be speaking at Pakistani positions. This must happen at the highest level.
So, I mean, Sherry, I think that's a really good segue into a question that's come up by former Air Chief Marshal Faiz Ahmed, who thinks very thoughtfully and in a very sort of calm and I think a professional manner about these issues. And he asks a question that I think a lot of us are asking, which is, the viewpoint that there should be a trilateral engagement around what happened after August 5th, because really, in a sense, what we've seen right now is a product of the August 5th attempted annexation of occupied Kashmir. How do you respond to the idea of a legal and diplomatic trilateral engagement with China, India, and Pakistan around Kashmir?
I think it's something that we should be looking at, which is why I said it's already a trilateral, it's been trilateralized. And it would be in Pakistan's interest to have at least an aspiring, another regional hegemon in the room in any kind of formal conversation on this. So I don't think there's any disadvantage to Pakistan. And also, I think Pakistan should be at this point making a very big public stated pledge to protect its line of control, and of course the working boundary, which often comes under attack, to revive. And there was a blip in the middle where this was said, but then it died down as part of our very kind of diffused public diplomacy or state diplomacy. We'll be asking for UNMOGIP, the UN military observer group, at international forums to be operationalized, because these are three unstable LOCs, a disputed border. LAC is a very differently perceived border, and these are fault lines that could pose a great deal of risk, not just to the region, but to Asia and the world. I think Kashmir still lies, the larger territory of Kashmir, Jammu and Kashmir still lies at the heart of this conversation, which is, by the way, being completely erased out of the public conversation in India. It's absolutely not being discussed. A few conscientious observers are saying, well, let's not be amnesiac about this. This may have to do with the domicile changes you're trying to make in Jammu and Kashmir. This may have to do with what we did on the 5th of August. But it meets with very little play there. We have to make sure this conversation goes forward. And for China to be in part of the room is absolutely, there shouldn't be a disadvantage at all. Aksai Chin is something that they have been emotionally, and obviously Tibet, very involved with. And they claim sovereignty over. They've never given sovereignty up over that.
Yeah. Look, Sherry, I mean, this obviously we could go for hours, I think, just with you, but we have to move to the panel. Before I let you go, Madam Sherry Rehman, one final question that if we could get a quick answer to, because I think it's an important one. there's been hints, and I think you've been very measured, and I am really grateful for that. But obviously you're a member of the opposition and you have legitimate concerns about the way in which this government has handled things. Marine Kashif is asking, what will it take for Pakistan's political parties to unite on issues? We don't get to see that kind of situational maturity from any leading party. Now, I don't know if I agree with the last bit of that, but it's not me that's answering the questions.
I understand.
What's the solution to this issue?
Yeah, in the interest of not being divisive in this kind of seminar and interaction, I'll just say, look, one thing: Kashmir and COVID, 1K, 1C, both are issues that Pakistan has, all political parties in Pakistan, and this includes the ruling party, all political parties have, without asking, been willing and able to come to the table to give a unified message to both the rest of the country and the rest of the world that we have no compromise on any discussion or any bargains on Kashmir. Whatever we do as a nation. There is no division here on that at all. So yes, we did ask for a joint session when August 5th happened, but it was the opposition that sought it. We looked for a briefing, which is the norm in such national security crises in Parliament and outside Parliament House. They usually happen at PM House, where heads of parties come in and they share a briefing also with the military. And everybody then comes up with a joint political and national security statement, as you know, a resolution, if you like, that then is transmitted to the rest of the world. This did not happen. We waited far and wide for that APC. We went to one with Nawaz Sharif. They came to ours. Despite severe political differences, Kashmir is one issue we don't stand on ceremony for. And unfortunately, the Prime Minister chose not to attend that meeting while staying 2 rooms away. While we waited for him 2 hours, all the political leadership, at least 40 people in the room. And then it was the army chief who had to sit on the side and give his briefing. And that's how the meeting concluded. So that's all I'm going to really say. The political parties are all on one table. Unfortunately, the government isn't making sure we are on that table. This is not a time to divide. It is a time to unite Pakistan.
Thank you, Madam Shari Rahman, President of Jinnah Institute, a vital member of the Senate of Pakistan, senior leader of the PPP, chairperson of the CPEC committee in our parliament. I'm grateful, one, to Asfar Ehsan and CPG for creating this opportunity for all of us, and to you, Madam Shari Rahman, for making yourself available. At this time, we'll end the keynote session and we'll zoom right into the panel discussion. I'm going to ask Madam Nasim Zehra to, if she can turn on her video and place it sideways rather than longitudinally. That'll make the view consistent with everyone else. And as that happens, I'm going to ask my first question of Ambassador Riaz Khokhar. The introductions have already been made, and so I won't repeat my deep admiration for everyone on the panel and how exciting it is to have you guys in a conversation. Khokhar Sahab, look, you understand China like few Pakistanis do. The vantage point of having represented the country there and then having been foreign secretary and then dozens, maybe hundreds of visits, even afterwards, maintaining relationships and understanding that country. Something feels different about China in the last month or so. Is that just, because we're naive and we don't understand history and I wasn't around in 1962? Or is the assertion and the muscularity and the maybe vicious is too hard, but it was a pretty brutal response. I mean, there were clubs with barbed wire and, there's like a lot of blood. And it seems even in the responses by the foreign ministry and by other spokespersons, there's no sort of letting down or backing off. China seems very clear and very linear on this. Is this a new China that we're seeing, President Xi's China, or is this China period? You'll have to unmute your mic, Khokhar Sahab, before you speak.
Can't hear.
Yeah, it's unmuted now, Khokhar Sahab.
Okay.
Bismillah. Fantastic.
Sure, thank you very much. I just want to make 2 or 3 very basic points. Sherry made a great introduction. 2, 3 very basic points. What has really triggered this thing? It's not only the question of Jammu and Kashmir and the status that the Indians have changed. It's fascinating how quickly the Chinese responded to the statement to August 5th. Amit Shah made a statement in the parliament saying that they will get back GB and Aksai Chin. Now, Chinese are very sensitive about territory and very sensitive about Aksai Chin. Now, it was on the 6th they made a statement, and the 7th they made a statement that was totally unacceptable. That was point 1. Secondly, the weather conditions prevented the Chinese from acting. That's an important factor here because it was between August and March, April. China is very clear about its core interests. Now let me go back a little bit to 1962. Before 62, there was this China-India bhai-bhai thing. It was China who approached India. There's a correspondence between Nehru and Chu Enlai that let's find a reasonable settlement. Nehru was very arrogant and he rejected it. Then Mao said, well, it seems that the Indians are looking for a war. And that's when the 1962 thing happened. It's very interesting that Nehru made desperate calls to Washington. His 2 letters to Kennedy, I think 16th or 17th of October, 2 letters asking for US assistance, asking for US Air Force to come into India, and in fact even allow their personnel, American personnel to protect India. These letters are worth looking at. Now, I want to say that is China really assertive? I mean, how many countries has China invaded? Hong Kong is their core interest. Taiwan is their even more important core interest because Taiwan reflects, the humiliation of 100 years. So Chinese are very sensitive about it. The question is, they feel being pushed in the Asia-Pacific region. Now, China is a landlocked country on 3 sides. The only opening it has is the Pacific, and it's under pressure there. So what has happened between India and China, and Sherry is absolutely right, it's no longer a skirmish or a minor bloody exchange, but it's got the potential of getting more serious. I don't see Chinese really being that aggressive. I think it's unfair because this is a perception that is being created in order to shall we say, further enhance pressure on China. And China is feeling it. So, all this talk about, pivot Asia, and of course now, the US president has made anti-China campaign as his central element of his campaign. He hasn't had any foreign policy success anywhere in the world. And I think this is the only issue on which there is a certain bipartisan support. And China, in fact, unfortunately, COVID kicked it off. And that's become a big story for Trump. So China is definitely feeling pressure, but at the same time, it feels confident enough to deal with it. Now, I think what is important is what is going to be the impact of all this? India is already in consultation with the United States, I'm sure, because I'm sure they're running to the United States again. Please help us. Where is our friendship? Where is our so-called defense agreements that we've had? What about Quad? I mean, in Quad, it's a very informal thing at the moment, and it's not like NATO. There's no automatic, shall we say, article that can spring these countries into action. So I think there is no doubt that the Chinese are feeling pressure. South China is, of course, a factor, but have the Chinese really interfered with free navigation? I don't think there have been these incidents. And also, I think the United States is not allowing some of these Southeast Asian countries to discuss in a substantive manner the South China issue. I think China is willing to talk to these, to the Philippines, to Malaysia, to Vietnam, Brunei, all the parties that are involved. And there were positive signs a few months ago. So what I'm saying is, my own feeling is China has certainly taken certain very important, shall we say, steps. I mean, the BRI is a geo-economic and geopolitical, idea, and there are many countries that are willing to be part of it. But United States is certainly discouraging countries to take part in it, and so is India. And I think this is an important factor, that the Chinese feel that the United States is trying to isolate them. And it's not going to happen so quickly. The important thing is that China would like to engage United States. I think if you see all the campaign that has been launched by the West or all of the United States against China, they've been sort of playing it down. But the Chinese are not going to compromise on what I consider, or they consider their core interests.
I think that's a fantastic sort of historical framing, Khokhar Saab, as I expected. Thank you for that. I want to move the sort of, we've taken this perspective of, where China's coming from. And let's move this a little bit. Nasim, if you don't mind, I'd like to bring the conversation to you, if we can get your full attention. And I just want to remind you to unmute your mic. So when you speak. So here's the question, Nasim. When I read your book, one of the great lessons from your book, of course, was the degree to which India felt shocked and surprised by Kargil, and the manner in which then, many of us studied, and I think you've been a sort of guiding light in that respect. We examined then India's response to that, and there was a whole range of institutional structure, organizational and cultural changes that Kargil initiated in Delhi. And the principle was that never again will India be surprised. When you look at the reporting on Galwan and what's happened in Ladakh, so much of the conversation seems to be around India wasn't expecting this, and India was clearly not prepared. I mean, even flying out the dead bodies and the injured out of Galwan was a real challenge. How is it that after 20 years, almost the exact same story in terms of a lack of preparation and sense of shock and surprise has taken place? Is India play faking this, or has the system gone back to pre-Kargil levels of preparation and preparedness within India? And is that the reason why India is trying to pin this and pivot this conversation away from China and towards Pakistan?
So in terms of, was India surprised? I think it's play faking it, plus the fact that India underestimated China's response. I think in some ways, when I see this unfolding, it does remind me of Kargil. And, we did not expect the Indian response the way it came. I think the Indians felt that in some ways the Chinese at this point in time were cornered, that they wouldn't, Chinese have gone back to the 1962 model in terms of the reaction. I think there are 4 or 5 very key issues here that are clear. One is that I think, as Khokhar said, for China, there are 2 red lines here. I mean, as far as the broader South China Sea is concerned, Taiwan, Hong Kong, etc., that's very clear that, you know, those are red lines. But coming closer to our region, one belt, one road, nothing that is going to strategically undermine that China is going to allow. Hence, we are looking at Azad Jammu, Kashmir, Gilgit, Baltistan, any kind of serious move by India on that front, we will see a response from the Chinese. On Aksai Chin, China is not going to allow any Indian adventurism there. So I think on these 2 issues, there are red lines that China has drawn. And India perhaps felt that it could, you know, go along so far, and as far as the line of actual control is concerned, let's not forget that India was active in the Galwan area, in the area which is supposed to be on the Chinese side, according to we know that there are 2 versions of the line of actual control. So India went in, you know, playing footsie, thinking that it will get away with it. And I think that the Chinese had to come back and make it very clear that here's a red line. This is something that is not acceptable to us. And the Indians, to some extent, Mosharraf, I think to a great extent, were banking on and are also still banking on American support. How does one look at the situation from here, you know, next few months? I would like to venture and say I don't see any startling major development on the Asian continent front in terms of some anti-Chinese group emerging, which would create some kind of a military threat to China. But we will see continuation of the containment policy. We'll continue to see continuation of the you know, subverting China policy. We will see US systematically moving forward with its containment China policy, but I don't see anything dramatic happening at all. I don't see anything dramatic happening. I think that the American moves, you may see movement of Chinese, American fleets in the region, you can see movement of troops, but I don't see that leading to any kind of conflict. It doesn't work for the Americans, it doesn't work for the Chinese, it doesn't work for the region as such, and I don't see that anybody is going to go into that mode at this point. Number 2, as far as China and India is concerned, China's has drawn the line. China's conveyed to India, you know, that thus far and no further, and China is not going to seek any kind of conflict. If you see the kind of statements that are coming out of Beijing in the last few days, you realize that they're talking about sitting down, having a dialogue, etc. And I think the Indians know in their hearts of heart that they can't move, you know, they can't move the envelope further. They can't get into a military conflict, any kind of armed conflict with China. I think those who General Saab will talk, you know, talk about it, I'm sure. But on the military front, the Indians on their own are no match for the Chinese, and no outside power, not even the US, is going to come and help the Chinese. So I think we're all in all, we are looking at a situation where, as far as Pakistan is concerned, I think that, yes, Sherry's right. We can expect some adventurism on the Pakistani front, you know, crossing, perhaps, well, the LOC has been, you know, there's been skirmishes along the LOC for the last few months. That may get exacerbated. I don't know. I mean, I don't put it past a realm of possibility that from either side you can have, you know, some developments, whether it's on Siachen, whether it's on LOC, across the LOC, and what is Pakistan thinking at this point? I think this is also very important. At one level, Pakistan has, you know, has said, let's open Kartarpur, and I think that's a very good thing. But on the other hand, is there anything that Pakistan has in its hands along with the Chinese that can convey to the Indians that no more adventurism is acceptable? However, all this being what it may be, I don't see any relief for the Kashmiris in Indian occupied Kashmir. I think that situation will likely continue, but in terms of AJK and Gilgit-Baltistan, we should be very clear that any kind of Indian adventurism there will provoke a Chinese response, and I think China has conveyed that very clearly. As far as the Indians being taken by surprise, I think that's a whole lot of boulder dash. I don't believe that for a second. I think that the Indians are play faking it. They're play faking it to the extent that their foreign minister, I don't know if you noticed when he arrived no, he didn't arrive. I think there was a video conference trilateral on the 24th of June, and you should have heard his words. I mean, he was saying the world must move on the basis of international law. If there is no justice, there can be no world order. I think if nothing else, Pakistan has got some words from the Indians to use in the future. I've never heard the Indians talk about international law and justice and breaking of accords, etc. in the past, the way they are talking now. I think this is all India's game, and I think Indians have bitten more than they can chew.
Nasim, thank you. I think that's a perfect segue for the question that I wanted to ask Mr. Kugelman, who of course keeps a very strong eye on the affairs in the region, and widely respected in both India and Pakistan and Washington. And of course, all this at a very young age. I've known Michael for many years and have really been fascinated by sometimes by the depth. But I have to say, on this India biting off more than it can chew, Michael, I wonder if Washington, D.C. analysts, many of whom are friends, including yourself, I wonder if there's any sort of introspection about, the degree of willingness to swallow whole Indian histrionics over the last few years, especially as the Indian market grew in a size and in a manner that made it almost an inevitable partner for the United States. After August 5th, Pakistanis and Pakistan have been pleading for the world, and particularly for our friends in the US, to examine the historical nature of the injustice that's been happening there and the very severe change that has occurred. And now what we're hearing from many friends in even New Delhi is that really this is China reacting in a way to August 5th. So notwithstanding what Ambassador Khokhar has said, I wanted to pose this question to you about the degree of kind of introspection, if any at all, is merited in DC, maybe even, talk about your own views on all of this, but really that India is the instigator of this whole thing with its August 5th annexation.
Well, thanks, Mosharraf. First of all, thanks for the kind introduction, and I wanted to thank the organizers for having me. It's quite an honor to be on such a distinguished panel, and there's no better way to start a Saturday morning than to have a geopolitical dialogue with friends in Pakistan. So to your question, Mosharraf, it's a good one. Our fellow panelists know that the way that the U.S. looks at India is shaped by the dynamics of a fairly rapidly growing partnership. I would not overstate the growth of that partnership, but if you look at how things have evolved since the early 90s and especially since the early 2000s, the U.S. has increasingly looked at India as aspirationally speaking, as a net security partner and as an important friend, if not eventually an ally, in essentially what is the core U.S. foreign policy goal these days, and that is to balance out the power of India, of China, in the Indo-Pacific, in Asia for sure. And certainly that suggests that officials in Washington tend to put it this way, give India the benefit of the doubt in many cases. I know there's a lot of unhappiness in Pakistan, and there has been for quite some time, and especially since August 5, that the US does not give sufficient attention or display sufficient concern about what is going on in Kashmir. And I can tell you this, that Trump, speaking specifically about the Trump administration officials do express concern privately about how things have evolved in India, particularly in terms of how the Modi government has aggressively pursued this Hindutva agenda. But the thinking in that regard is not to say, okay, well, it looks like India is going in a troubling direction. We may want to sort of scale back our relations with India. No, that's not how it is. The concern is that India could in time become so distracted by its domestic agenda, particularly if you were to have the types of things that you had, such as back earlier this year when Trump was in India and you had these riots in India, in New Delhi, that turned violent. Concern within the Trump administration that could distract the US, could distract India from working with the US to pursue shared strategic goals. But to be sure, there is a tendency for the U.S. to look at India as a responsible and as a responsible player and as a vital partner in this U.S. objective to roll out its Indo-Pacific strategy, its Indo-Pacific policy. And that sort of brings us to the question about Article 370. Should people here be taking it more seriously? I mean, I think that there is a clear consensus, and I include myself in this consensus, that Article 370 did certainly play a role in this current border crisis between India and China. I think you could really bet your bottom dollar on that. It's very clear that the day after India announced the decision, the next morning, August 6th, China's foreign ministry issued a very strongly worded statement rejecting it. And then, in course, China rejected these maps that the Indian government put out depicting the region as India saw it in the Article 370 scenario. And then China attempted to bring up this issue at the UN Security Council. Up to the end of 2019, it didn't really make that much headway. And then, once the weather was right in Ladakh, then it acted, so to speak, getting us to where we've been over the last few months. But, I think that we really have to look at other possible motivating factors as well for China's decision to act in the way that it has in this crisis. Factors in place well before August 5th, 2019. And we've already covered some of these in this discussion today. Indian infrastructure building, which has been ongoing and long-standing, long predates August 5th. And of course, as I think we've discussed before, one road in particular that was completed sometime last year in 2019 that stretches from Leh all the way down very close to the Karakoram Pass. And clearly that's something that enables India to project power and it better enables it to protect its claims. I think that's clearly concerning to China. And again, we're talking about a road that was completed some time ago, well before the repeal of Article 370. The dynamics of the US-India-China triangle, I think, are also an important motivating factor to keep in place here. Of course, the US-China relationship is plummeting. US-India relations have been growing. And both of these trajectories have been in place for a long time and well before August 5th. It was back in 2017, as I recall, the end of 2017, when the Trump administration issued its first national security strategy, which identified strategic rivalry as the top US national security threat. And of course, China being America's top strategic rival suggests that the administration was officially looking at China as arguably its biggest national security threat. And we don't have to go through the things that have happened to reflect just how toxic the US-China relationship is. It's a toxic mess. And of course, the US-India relationship has been growing for quite some time as well. I would argue that one of the few key US bilateral relationships that has not suffered that much during the Trump era is the US-India relationship. And so I would argue that China has wanted to send a tough message to both New Delhi and to the United States. One way to do that is to push pressure test India in its own backyard. I think the biggest reason, perhaps, why Article 370 should not be seen as the sole motivating factor for this current crisis in Ladakh is that China has really been on the offensive in a number of places, not just Ladakh. I mean, there's been a series of provocations in the South China Sea that I think have very little, if anything, to do with the Article 370 repeal. Same with what China has been up to in Hong Kong. Yeah, this is the so-called wolf warrior diplomacy in action. And, China identified by name that policy before August 5th, 2019. I think it was actually in July of 2019 when the Indian Foreign Ministry spokesperson, of course, the former Chinese DCM at your embassy there in Pakistan, used the term. And we've seen China acting assertively in South Asia for a number of years. Naturally, the Belt and Road Initiative is the main vehicle, and I think in of itself, that's a perfectly innocuous thing. But if you look at military actions that have sought to test India, I think you have to go back to what happened in the Doklam standoff, which is back in 2017. So, bottom line is that, to be sure, the Article 370 story is essential, and you cannot have a conversation on this issue of Chinese motivations without highlighting it. But I think that you have to look at there's a broader backdrop, a broader geopolitical backdrop that we have to look to as well. And just to wrap up, I think Mosharraf, the exact term you would use is that Pakistan has been pleading with the world to be looking at the significance of Article 370. That's a very important point, and I think that this crisis, if we want to talk about opportunities, I know that was one of the themes for this discussion. If we want to look at opportunities for Pakistan, well, Article 370 is now very much back in the spotlight. I know that Pakistan had sought to bring it to the attention of key players globally for a number of months after August 5th of last year. And I would argue that after a few months, the tension really petered out. It was difficult to maintain that narrative. But now it is true that given that you have this crisis playing out between India and China, and given that so many, including in India, as you mentioned, Mosharraf, are talking about are debating the Article 370 repeal and its merits, I think that gives Pakistan another opportunity to sort of promote this view to the world of India as, according to Pakistan, an aggressive power, an expansionist power, acting unilaterally to change the territorial status of a disputed territory. And I think now it has added ammunition in this effort to bring attention to Article 370 and its the problematic implications of it. And that is that the revoking Article 370 was destabilizing because it has provoked a major geopolitical crisis between two major nuclear-armed global players, India and China. So I think that's sort of important to put out there as well. Now, again, oh, sorry, I can rush up there.
And I want to come back, obviously, to each of the speakers. We're beginning to pile up some questions as well, but I need to sort of shift the conversation to General Lodhi. And first of all, let me thank you, General Saab, for your incredible patience in waiting.
It's a pleasure.
For me to bring, to give you the floor. I wanted to frame a question for you as well that kind of builds up from where Michael has left off, which is that, I mean, I thought it was interesting that Michael repeatedly referred to India being tested or China testing India. If you look at the sort of net power balance or imbalance, I don't know if India is in a position to test anybody, even Pakistan, as we saw when India attempted to test Pakistan in February last year. India needed to plead for the return of its soldier. But let's leave that rhetoric aside because obviously we want peace in the region. Jalsa, no matter what Pakistan does, India is constantly and relentlessly upping the rhetorical ante. And it's doing so with a very specific intent to provoke Pakistan. Just today, Indian sources are talking about Chinese Air Force refuelers landing in Skardu. Somebody talked about 30 Chinese aircraft landing in Skardu. The Chinese are setting up an air base in Skardu. What I wanted to ask you was, we come to you last, but partly because you're our last line of defense as a former member of our armed forces. Does Pakistan need Chinese sort of backing in Skardu when it comes to defending Azad Jammu and Kashmir and Gilgit-Baltistan? Or is this more of the kind of Arnab Goswami school of journalism where, you just keep manufacturing new facts constantly to align with an existing narrative that basically misguides the great people of the Republic of India?
Thank you very much, Mosharraf. First of all, I must clarify that listening to such great people is always an honor, and I could have waited another 2 hours if such personalities are speaking. So, nothing on that. One thing I think we are very clear, and everybody knows it, that each nation has to fight her own war. Nobody comes to really be your partner in a way unless you have a NATO type understanding or erstwhile Warsaw Pact or something. So Pakistan having no such pact with China. So I don't think that, of course, a lot of help otherwise is coming and will be coming as far as material support is concerned, as far as political support is concerned, even diplomatic support is concerned. But once it comes to fighting a war, Pakistan will have to fight its own war. There's no doubt about it. But we also know that between two nuclear countries, there cannot be an open war. And Indians also know that. Maximum skirmishes, I think, could be of the level whatever happened before and whatever has happened in Ladakh. Not more than that. So there's another type of war which is going on. And there I would like to add that one thing to understand for our leadership is that intricate political problems do not get resolved through diplomacy only. Diplomacy is the vanguard. There's no doubt about it. It prepares grounds. It prepares environment. But other potentials have to be employed really to, let us say, to bring India on the talking table. And India has been talking to us, in the past. And if we can all, just remember that what was the environment that really brought India on that table. So unless you create the same environment or something close to that, India will not talk to us. One thing which I would like to add, because I don't know whether, what is your plan, that whether you are going to give us more time to speak individually, or this question is the only thing that we have to answer. Whatever has happened in Ladakh, from military point of view, it is just tactical in nature. I mean, just getting onto certain heights and coming 2 or 3 kilometers is the action itself militarily is just a tactical action. But yes, its impact has been operational. Once we talk of this Daulat Beg and Karakoram Pass and Siachen and all that, even CPAC. So you can say the impact is operational. But the reason is definitely strategic, which our friends have already talked. And I would just hurriedly gloss over it, that 370 we have talked about. I'll not talk about it again. But this deepening strategic partnership between India and America, and this security arrangement of Quad and Quad Plus, these are the basic reasons which have created all this row. And whenever there will be any talk, maybe it will be in the name of Ladakh, but actual talk will be about Indo-US partnership, how deep it is, what are the intentions, and the Quad Plus security arrangement, that what are the intentions. And I think of all the countries which could be on the crossroad, India is on the crossroad. They have to decide whether they want to integrate themselves with the region, with the neighborhood, for the betterment of their own people and the people of the region, or they want to align themselves with a distant power and antagonize everybody around. So that is a decision which they'll have to take. So just your core question which you asked, whether we would be requiring Chinese help, whatever help will be requiring, that will be forthcoming. There's no doubt about it. And we can immediately get certain very sophisticated military hardware, whatever we can absorb and all that. But fighting we'll have to do ourselves. But then again, fighting will be of a level which will be very much manageable for us. And let me tell you that in a limited war, the smaller power is not at a disadvantage.
I think that's a really helpful, and I must say, Jan Saab, thank you for being so crisp and brief. Let me, there's lots of questions that have emerged, and I think most of the questions are better than anything that I could come up with. So let me begin with you, Jan Saab, with one of the questions that predates the panel in the sense that my friend Yusuf Hassan shared it early on. And he asks, could it be because basically he notes that the government of Pakistan did not take a public stand on the China-India conflict. Lots of us think that's a good idea. Some of us think not. But he asks, is the reason that Pakistan hasn't taken a public stand be because it actually does not want the conflict positioned as a trilateral or a three-way China, Pakistan versus India conflict, which would then maybe pull in other countries, and Pakistan doesn't want to do that? I mean, that's a pretty good question, and I wonder. I don't know the answer to that for myself, but what is your view, Janan Saab?
I think if Pakistan had taken a more, let us say, more obvious statement or more aggressive statement, and would have, shown more integrity and solidarity with China, it would have worked for India, because India would have, made a lot of hue and cry that, you see, there's a collaboration going on, and actually they want to do all this. So I think whatever Pakistan did, in my own assessment, they did was right. But I should also, I'm sure that that would have happened. But I would have suggested to Pakistani leadership that they should have asked, and even now they should ask China, that how would they like us to help them? Because there's a very good saying that whenever you want to help somebody, please ask him or her what sort of help they want. It is also relevant in case of Kashmir that once we try to help the Kashmiris in our own way, we must ask the Kashmiris that what type of help they want from us. So similarly, I would argue that I think we must ask China. You are a very good friend. Please let us know what sort of diplomatic statement is best suited to our interests. And the answer, I think, would be the same that Pakistan has already done.
Janzab, one more question to you, and then I'll start bringing questions. In fact, this question, I would like answers from the rest of the panel. And Sherry, I'm delighted that you're still here, and maybe you can also address this question, but I'm going to start with General Saab. Barkan Saeed asks, would it make sense for Pakistan to use this window of opportunity and get back our areas occupied by India, such as Siachen? I think this is an interesting question. Obviously, there's some immediate reactions people have, but it's an interesting question because this may be on a lot of minds. Genocide.
All right. I think if Pakistan wishes to take any initiative or any big risk, then it should not be only for Siachen. Then it should be, for the entire resolution of Kashmir. And of course, once you say that you will resolve Kashmir, it doesn't mean that you will occupy Kashmir and then it will get resolved. Actually, with the help of Chinese, with the help of the, along with, let us say, the resistance movement and the Pakistan side, if they can put enough pressure physically and politically to bring India on the table, agreeing for the resolution of the issue, that would be good enough. But I'm doing anything, going physically for something like Siachen would not be good enough in my own assessment. I think we should look for higher objectives.
Well, one of the ways in which higher objectives can be achieved is through diplomacy. So maybe I'll start with Ambassador Khokhar, and then and Sherry, and then Nasim and Michael. From a diplomatic perspective, Ambassador Khokhar, if we follow up this question, I think General Lodhi's response has been very, very measured, and I agree with it entirely. But then, does Pakistan have the diplomatic capability as of today to actually make this case? I put Michael at the end because he kind of ended with a bit of advice diplomatically. So let's start with you, Ambassador Khokhar. Does Pakistan have the capacity to use this moment in favor of a resolution of Kashmir or Siachen?
Well, Pakistan has been doing its bit. Unfortunately, as you've seen, that the international community hasn't really responded. Look at the human rights violations that have been taking place in Kashmir. And the general attitude, of course, there have been many articles in Western newspapers, etc., etc. But the question is, major capitals have not been able to, have the nerve to really go out of the way to criticize India or asking India to stop A, B, C, D of what's happening in Kashmir. I think that's one aspect of it. The other thing is, let me just talk about Washington. I think there are some difficulties. I mean, our relations have somewhat improved, but my impression is that there aren't very many people in Washington who want to speak about Pakistan. I think that's also a problem that the Chinese are facing. There's nobody who's going to bat for the Chinese in the present atmosphere. So I think there is a problem, but we can continue to raise this matter with bilaterally with the countries. We can launch a campaign. We can have a kind of a campaign in the media. We can send out, political figures to various capitals so that they can, like Sherry, for instance, who's well known, and there are others also who can go out and tell them what the present situation is like and where are we heading. India is not interested in talking to Pakistan. Sherry made this point about maybe a prospect of a trilateral dialogue. India doesn't accept a bilateral dialogue with Pakistan. It's not going to accept a trilateral dialogue with China, Pakistan, as two countries who are actually adversaries of India. I mean, that's the way it is. So I don't see that prospect happening. But the idea is a good one. Maybe it can be done at the non-governmental level. But on the government level, no question.
Okay, well, let's take that to Sherry. Ambassador Sherry Rehman, what is your response to this? I mean, I still want a response on the diplomatic capability. I know that Khokhar Saab would never throw the Foreign Office under the bus, and I'm not keen to do that either. And the question really isn't about the Foreign Office, because diplomatic capability, I think, is not restricted at all to the Foreign Office. Yeah. I think diplomatic capability has to do with national power, which the government of the day is principally responsible for. So certainly not looking to blame, whatever. And again, there is no blame imputed or implied. Sherry, what is the level of capability for Pakistan to make this case right now? And connected to that, wouldn't that diminish or limit the potential of a trilateral engagement? And Sherry, I'm going to request a really quick response, because now we're running, we're slowly, or rather rapidly, approaching time. So I want to get through a couple of rounds of questions. Sherry Rehman, you have to unmute your mic first. Sherry, you have to unmute your mic.
Very quickly, in one Urdu term, hosla. Okay, that's one view of looking at hosla kare. But quickly addressing your business of, do we have the political capital to suggest or move the needle on some on a complex equation that there has been very little appetite for in Western capitals? That's really what you're addressing. China, of course, would be interested. But even China, despite its change from 1962, this is a different China. This is certainly a different China from 1962. We all know that. It's grown in size and stature, and it's projecting power in ways it didn't do before. And most of it is economic power, which is where I think a lot is being challenged. The West feels challenged towards that. Now, having going into this business of using this as an opportunity, I think it's a narrative or public diplomacy opportunity. It is not in any real sense achievable as a big existential goal of resolving Kashmir without a lot of other variables in play, and that would even actually involve China. Does China have that fire in its belly right now And I don't think that is particularly the case. It's being portrayed as an aggressive and very expansionist power. China essentially is not. It's Confucianism actually, like liberalism in the West, allows it to say one thing and perhaps act with realism as a foreign policy ideology, but it is still one of the most restrained powers that the world sees. And for us to expect China to jump into it, it helps at the UN, it helps with the votes, it will help if there's an attack, I'm pretty sure, if at all you need the help. But to expect it to change the game for Kashmir and Pakistan and pitch in its lot, it's got into a trade war with the United States. Its supply lines are choked by COVID. It is already being subjected to somewhat of a mercantilist blockade from India. It will be. Not that it will matter much. China only has 3% of its exports going into India and only 1% coming in. So it's not really going to be that affected, but it's not about to change years of public positioning and careful diplomatic soft power advances to suddenly become a new kind of interventionist power. It's not a big interventionist power by nature. It may be changing. Those may be the requirements of a regional hegemon where its size is already doing that. In purchasing power, it's the world's largest economy right now. So it is catching up to its bigger role. But as yet, even in Afghanistan, you see it brings little baggage. It comes to the table with an acceptance all round. It's not seen as a large imperialist intervening power, leaving blood and tears in its wake. So, although obviously you can say that in Galwan it may have acted differently, but it was responding and it wanted to say that this is a Rubicon you can't cross. So this is a line you can't cross. But I can't say that will immediately prompt it into solving a large international dispute. Jumping in.
Yeah. Nasim, I wanted to get your comment as well. You'll have to unmute your mic. The same question, really, in terms of diplomatic capability, the notion of Pakistan being able to deploy whatever national power and capability and projection it has in order to help solve some long-standing issues. Is this that moment? Could it become that moment? And what are the things that are in the way, Nasim?
No, I don't think it can become that moment. It can certainly become an opportunity for Pakistan to further the Kashmir struggle, the Kashmir story. I mean, look, we are dealing with a world that has sat there for half a century plus on Palestine, not half a century, 80 years plus. And, what's worse than the situation of the Palestinians and what the Indians have done recently in Kashmir with the, they've changed laws. The Indian army's bought land there. People can come and locate themselves in Kashmir. So there's very clear-cut ethnic kind of configuration that is taking place, and nobody is going to speak up. So yeah, what Pakistan can do at this point is push the UN Human Rights Commission to go for an inquiry committee. Those kind of things, I think that Sherry also alluded to. But beyond that, I don't think that it's in anybody's interest in terms of the big players. It's certainly China. The last thing China wants is to get involved in an issue like Kashmir. Nobody has a stomach for bringing Kashmir into the forefront at this point. I don't think any of our allies would want it. I mean, our friends like Turkey, Iran, etc. I don't think OIC wants it. OIC is worth nothing. But anyway, still. And China certainly, our major ally, doesn't want that. On China and Pakistan, I just wanted to say that 4 days ago, the foreign minister was on my show and he said that the Chinese came and especially thanked us for our support, etc. And So I think one of the panelists also said, I think Pakistan's done what it can wisely do on China, and there's very little it can do other than tell China, we are right behind you. But for the Kashmiris, I think that it's a long haul, Mosharraf, and it's into the 3rd century. And I think it's very deadly what the Indians have begun to do since August 5th. And God alone knows if this can be reversed, but it's a very difficult situation. Certainly not the time right now to take any advantage, other than the fact that, well, even the Chinese the steps that the Chinese have taken right now, Chinese will not, I do not think that on Kashmir, the Chinese are going to take any substantive action. When they took that position on the 6th of August saying this is not acceptable, they were thinking more of Ladakh and Aksai Chin and what that means, because remember our agreement with the Chinese says very clearly that until final settlement of Jammu and Kashmir, they can have Aksai Chin. So I think the Chinese are looking at something completely different, not Indian occupied Kashmir.
Thanks, Nasim. Michael, your popularity in South Asia, of course, knows no bounds. And so plenty of questions for you. And I'm going to bring 2 of them to you directly. One is Major General Samrez Sadiq, retired officer of the Pakistan Army and the author of a recent book called Fighting Shadows, Post-War on Terror Pakistan, and happens to be a dear friend. He's asking how you see the linkage between Ladakh, the evolving situation in Ladakh, and the security of the China-Pakistan economic corridor. I think that's a really good question. And then similarly, well, not so similarly, but Air Chief Marshal retired Faiz Amir has noted that Mike Pompeo called the Chinese Communist Party a rogue actor. And I think quite rightly, he feels that this is ominous and unnecessarily toxic language, which, I think General Faiz, Air Chief Marshal Faiz is a decent man. But that decency perhaps belongs in a different era, because this is the kind of toxicity in political language that unfortunately has become commonplace all around the world, not just in the United States, but all around the world. Unfortunately, even in Pakistan, but certainly in Hindu extremist India. Maybe you could comment on that as well, Michael. These 2, and if I could get really quick questions, then I want to do a couple more rounds of questions. Really appreciate brevity here.
Sure, yeah, I'll be brief. And I think popularity may not be the operative term. Maybe notoriety is better. At any rate, so the first question, absolutely. Similarities, sort of links between Ladakh and the CPEC situation. Certainly when you look at the increasingly strident threats from India to quote unquote reclaim IOK and Gilgit-Baltistan, all that, certainly that's concerning to China, given that CPEC is envisioned to go through those areas. So I think that's an important thing to point out. Secondly, not to get too speculative, but if we want to talk about how India could potentially retaliate against China, there's very little that it can do militarily, given that it's the weaker player in terms of conventional military power. But I think something to be concerned about is that India could try to covertly retaliate by targeting Chinese interests in Pakistan. And of course, because of CPEC, you have a very deep Chinese footprint there. So I think that certainly is something to keep in mind, and I acknowledge that as a very real threat. Second question on what Pompeo said, there's been this nasty rhetoric. The U.S. has used this nasty rhetoric toward China for a long time. The comment about China being a rogue is not necessarily new. I think it works well politically in the U.S. on the campaign trail. Maybe there's a temptation to think that there could be a wag the dog moment, that the U.S. would try to provoke a war with China to strengthen to strengthen a politically vulnerable president during an election year. No, it's not going to happen. There's going to be a lot of nasty rhetoric. And I think the U.S. will want to try to intimidate China. We talked about the aircraft carrier moving into the South China Sea, but I really don't think that the U.S. is trying to. I don't think we have to worry about some type of conflict.
Thanks, Michael. There's a question here by Kareem Panjani, General Saab, which I wanted to bring to you because it's kind of a theme that, I feel, again, unfortunately, it's hard for me to be wedded to the news cycle as today, tomorrow, and yesterday. We go back about 3 or 4 years, and one of the big narratives within Pakistan has been the vulnerability of the country because of its economic situation. And Kareem asks, with long-term loose structure of the economy, weak economic indicators, and Pakistan's reliance on external actors, will Pakistan ever be able to diplomatically interest global powers other than China and be more confident and more successful in prompting and promoting its issues? I think I know what you're going to say, but I do think this is a question that we need to revisit and I think just be incessant about. But General Saab, what is your view on this?
Yes, I think this goes without saying, and all of us understand that to really influence the international players, you have to have certain prerequisites. And one of them, you should be very well integrated into the international economic system, into the international political system. And we very well know that we are nowhere close to that. So that thing is not likely to happen. I mean, getting a lot of support, diplomatic support as far as the world is concerned or the known world players are concerned. But then, may I ask a counter question that as I said earlier also, that I would like to listen to the examples where diplomacy has solved some deep political issues. Whatever happened in Syria, was it resolved through diplomacy? Whatever is happening elsewhere, what happened in Afghanistan also, we say that table talks are the final thing, but then how did we reach those table talks? Whatever is happening in Yemen and Iraq and all that. So it is not only the international support. At times, there are other factors which, if you have them, if you have those, you can resolve certain issues, or at least you can go through the resolution of that. And then one question which we must ask ourselves, that Pakistan Armed Forces, because of whom, and I agree that a lot of pain has been exacted economically and socially on this country. If today we say that we can't do anything and we have to wait for other factors, then please give your resources to those other factors. Then why are you consuming all these resources? So, and with the passage of time, the gulf, the economic gulf and the political gulf between India and Pakistan is likely to widen rather than to shrink. So I would say, you asked the question, is this the moment? I would say such a moment will never be available again, where the China is, breathing on their shoulders, on their neck. The distance movement is quite potent if it has not taken up, to the full extent. And you are also, ready. And if you want to do something, whatever, and I'm not saying that open war or whatever, but there are so many things that can be done. This is the moment. And those people who think that this is not the moment, no, I think such opportunity will never come again.
I think that's I'm so sorry that we only have 7 minutes left to go, Ambassador Khokhar. I pose that question to you. Pakistan in 2019 spent 11 billion on its defense. India spent 71 billion, so 60 billion more. China spent 261 billion, so 190 billion more than India. Do these differentials determine the outcomes, or, as General Lodhi is suggesting, are there other factors that we need to integrate into our thinking about how to resolve these disputes and these conflicts? Very quickly, Ambassador Saab.
Mosharraf, I think 2 very basic points. One, the country has to be politically stable, economically strong, militarily strong. Then you will be respected, also in the region. India, for instance, is out of step with all the countries in the region, out of step. The point I want to emphasize is that capacity, there is a capacity issue, resources. $11 billion is $11 billion in defense in the current situation is chicken feed compared to what India is doing. And you are not adding to it the enormous purchases that India is making. It's just placed a huge order with the Russians. It's got an order with the US. It's got an order with Israel, with France. So India is really building up its defenses. For what? Of course, the bulk of the forces, as you know, are deployed against Pakistan. Pakistan has to be ready, clear, not only militarily, we have to be prepared, but we have to be, as you're right, diplomatically, we have to inform the world what exactly is happening in this region. What is India up to? It's not going to take on China. It will not take on China unless it gets some kind of blessing from the United States. And I think the United States at the moment is a bit confused.
So, Nasim, I want to bring this to you. You know, you and I have had these discussions over the years so many times, and I always feel like you bring wisdom and balance to this. But, you know, when I hear Ambassador Khokhar's, appeal that, look, 11 billion is chicken feed. And then I think about how many children don't go to school, how many people don't get to eat, how limited our SAS program is for the poor, how much we have to borrow from other countries, kind of the point that General Lodhi made earlier as well. And a point that all Pakistanis are conscious of. This is a very poor country, and the proportion of its spending to defend itself against clearly an aggressive power. What's the answer to this? Clearly it's not 0-1, but where do we find the equilibrium that allows the people of Pakistan to have the strength to withstand the constant aggression that India clearly is on a path that it's not going to give up very soon?
So I guess, Mosharraf, defense budgets world over are necessary in our region. Particularly, I think my issues with the defense budget is, how transparent, where is it being spent, and indeed, if you bring in the pensions, you realize that the defense budget is even more. So I think defense budget has to be there. The question is, if the defense budget is there, going back to General Lodhi, and I mean, obviously, it's a much bigger debate. That is it because of defense only that number one, the budget has to be more transparent, and there's got to be real oversight, genuine, legitimate oversight. We don't have real oversight. I mean, who knows about the details of the defense budget? That's one issue. The other is, of course, that is it just the defense budget that leads to the problems that you are so rightly talking about? I don't think that that's the entire story. I think there are other factors which we won't go into right now. I think that the question that was earlier being discussed about, can Pakistan do something right now? And General Lodhi said this is the opportunity, and there will not be another opportunity of this kind. My comment on that would be that these issues are best not discussed. I can't imagine for a second that somewhere in the Pakistan army's inner circles, the question of opportunity is not being viewed, and the fact that in our entire region for the last so many decades, surreptitious moves and etc. etc. For me, the question will be how wisely thought out any move will be. That's
Nasim, thank you for that. We have literally less than 2 minutes left. I think that perhaps I would want to bring Asfar in to kind of close and share a note of thanks for the brilliant opening session by Shari Rehman, for the comments and the commentary, the thoughtful and bold ideas that were discussed by all the speakers. I'm grateful to everyone. I think one conclusion that clearly comes out of today is that the vilification of China is inconsistent with the facts of the events. And I think that China is a restrained power. That seems to be the agreement. Obviously, not everyone agrees with that, but for me, that was one clear takeaway. And the other was that Pakistan should be thinking out of the box, even if it doesn't do anything. I think we need to be bold enough and pursue our interests enough that rather than always taking a decisively passive approach, we need to at least consider ideas that are not passive. With that, Asfar, thank you for this opportunity to me, and thank you for arranging a brilliant panel. Thanks to you and to all of CPG.
Thank you, Mosharraf, and thanks to all the participants and all the speakers, Senator Shari Rehman, Ambassador Riaz Khokhar, General Naeem, Khalid Lodhi, Nasim, Zehra, and Michael, and of course, Mosharraf Zaidi. With this note, the meeting is adjourned, and this video is available.